The Black Death. 1347. A fleet of Genoese ships docked in Sicily, arriving from the Black Sea. The sailors were dead or dying, covered in black tumors, oozing blood and pus. Port authorities sent them away. It was already too late. Over the next 5 years, the Black Death eliminated between 30 and 60% of Europe's population, between 20 and 50 million dead on the continent. Globally, possibly 200 million. The bacterium Yersinia pestis didn't choose by social class. It killed peasants and kings with equal efficiency. It killed the King of Aragon, perhaps a third of the European clergy. Entire villages disappeared. Survivors couldn't bury the dead. What it left behind wasn't just death. The scarcity of workers raised survivors' wages. The church's power collapsed. European art shifted from representations of glory to representations of skulls. The Black Death didn't end feudalism, but it opened the wound that ended it. Yersinia pestis still exists. Cases are recorded every year. Treatment is with common antibiotics. The difference between 1347 and today is that we know the name of the thing: smallpox. It existed for at least 3,000 years before being eradicated. It killed between 300 and 500 million people in the 20th century alone. Its face is unmistakable. Pustules covering the entire body, including the palms of the hands and the soles of the feet. No safe surface. The mortality rate reached 30%. Survivors were often left blind or permanently disfigured. In the Americas, and it arrived with European colonizers and was more devastating than any weapon. Indigenous populations with no prior immunity had mortality rates above 90% in some regions. In 1980, the WHO declared smallpox eradicated, the only living thing humanity has completely eliminated from natural existence. Today, only 2 laboratories in the world hold samples of the virus, one in the United States, one in Russia. The debate over destroying those samples is still unresolved. Level 2. The ones that war carried, typhus. It's not the disease you think it is. It's a bacterium transmitted by lice, and it changed the outcome of more wars than any military strategy. Napoleon's army in 1812 departed with 600,000 men toward Russia. It returned with fewer than 100,000. It wasn't the Russian winter, it was typhus. Instead, the disease followed armies because they created perfect conditions. Men crowded together, without hygiene, in trenches and barracks. Typhus found its ideal environment in any war. It killed more than the battles of Gettysburg, more than the battles of the Marne. In the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp, it was typhus that killed Anne Frank, not a gas chamber. Cholera, brutal in mechanism and in numbers. The bacterium Vibrio cholerae infects the intestine and forces the body to expel fluids at a rate with no parallel in other diseases. A person can lose liters in hours. Without replacement, circulatory collapse comes in under 24 hours. There have been 7 documented cholera pandemics. The third, between 1852 and 1860, killed more than 1 million in Russia alone. Physician John Snow mapped cholera cases in London in 1854 and identified a contaminated water pump as the source. It was the first use of modern epidemiology to control an epidemic. He didn't know what caused cholera, but he understood how it spread before anyone knew the bacterium's name. Up to here, disease's history documented clearly. The next level belongs to those that came too fast for the world to understand. Level 3. The ones that came too fast. The Spanish flu, 1918. It didn't start in Spain. It started, probably, in the United States, in Kansas. Spain became the name because it was one of the few countries that didn't censor information during World War I. Countries at war wanted to hide the epidemic, Spain reported. The name stuck. In under 2 years, it killed between 50 and 100 million people. More than all of World War I, more than World War II. The most disturbing detail, it killed primarily young, healthy adults. The opposite of normal influenza patterns. The healthy immune system overreacted, destroying the lung tissue itself in the process. Victims often drowned in their own fluids within hours of symptom onset. Polio. For decades, every summer was a season of terror in the United States. Pools closed, public squares emptied. Parents kept children home because the disease attacked primarily children. The polio virus doesn't kill in most cases. In 1% of infections, it invades the nervous system and paralyzes muscles. The lungs could stop. Children woke up unable to breathe. The iron lung was the solution, a machine that breathed for you. And photos of hospital wards with hundreds of children in parallel iron lungs are among the most disturbing images in modern medicine. Jonas Salk's vaccine in 1955 changed everything. By 1979, polio was eradicated from the United States. By 1994, from the Americas. It still exists, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, where vaccination campaigns were interrupted by conflict. The barrier to final eradication in those two countries is not scientific. The oral polio vaccine works. The barrier is political. In regions where vaccination campaigns have been targeted by violence and where distrust of external health interventions has been actively cultivated, the last 2% of a disease is sometimes the hardest, not because it is biologically resistant, but because the human systems required to deliver it are not. Level 4. The absolute anomalies. Ebola, named after the Ebola River in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where it was first identified in 1976. Mortality rate varies by strain, from 25 to 90% of those infected. The most lethal strain killed up to 90% in isolated outbreaks. What makes it different is how it progresses visibly. Initial symptoms mimic any common fever. Then the virus attacks the blood vessels. Clotting fails. Bleeding begins. In 2014, the largest outbreak in history emerged from West Africa. Over 11,000 dead. The Ebola vaccine was approved in 2019, 43 years after the virus was identified. And then there's this one, the most recent, the one still being debated, COVID-19. In December 2019, a cluster of unusual pneumonia cases was reported in Wuhan, China. In March 2020, the WHO declared a pandemic. Global excess mortality estimates range from 15 to 20 million deaths attributable to the virus. The debate about its origin has not been formally resolved. What separates it from every other disease on this list is that it happened in real time, with cameras, with social media, with governments broadcasting press conferences as I See Us collapsed. Humanity had never observed a pandemic from inside it while it was happening, with that level of simultaneous information. And it was the first pathogen on this list for which vaccines were developed in under a year. Something considered impossible before 2020. 8 plagues, 8 ways microscopic organisms found to reshape entire civilizations. The Black Death left a mark beyond the body count. With a third of the workforce dead, surviving laborers could demand wages. Serfdom began collapsing under the pressure of labor scarcity. The feudal structure that had defined European society for centuries began its irreversible erosion, not through revolution, but through arithmetic. The plague created the conditions for the Renaissance. Smallpox eradication required not just a vaccine, but a global surveillance and response system capable of finding every case within 72 hours. The final eradication push in the 1970s involved thousands of health workers, many operating in regions with no roads, no electricity, and active armed conflict. The last case was a hospital cook in Somalia who survived. He is still alive. Typhus bacteria need both a host and a vector. Eliminate the louse, and the disease stops. The fundamental insight that won more battles than any strategy. Disease transmission requires a chain. Break one link. The campaign against louse-borne typhus in World War II involved mass delousing of prisoner populations using DDT, the first large-scale use of an insecticide in human history. Cholera's mechanism of death is straightforward. The bacteria produce a toxin that forces cells in the intestinal lining to pump water out of the body at a rate that overwhelms every compensatory mechanism. Patients can lose 20 liters of fluid per day. The rehydration solution that prevents death costs less than $1 per dose. The gap between the cost of the cure and the annual death toll is not a medical problem. The 1918 flu spread so rapidly in part because the Western Front had created the perfect evolutionary pressure. A virus that killed too slowly spread further than one that killed immediately. The virus that kills its host in 3 weeks reaches the next city. The one that kills in 3 hours does not. The most successful pathogens are the ones that keep their hosts alive and mobile long enough to spread. Ebola's jump from animal reservoirs to humans is not accidental. It happens at specific ecological boundaries, where deforestation and hunting bring people into contact with bat populations that carry the virus without becoming sick. Every major outbreak has been traceable to a specific ecological disruption. The disease is a symptom of something the landscape is doing. Polio paralysis is a rare outcome of infection. Fewer than 1% of those infected develop paralysis. The majority of infections are asymptomatic. The virus circulates invisibly through a population for months before anyone notices paralysis cases. By the time it's detected, it has already spread far beyond the initial cases. This is why eradication requires finding and vaccinating people who show no symptoms at all. COVID-19 generated over 300 million confirmed infections in its first 2 years and left a phenomenon documented in medical literature as long COVID, a post-infectious syndrome affecting an estimated 10% of survivors with persistent symptoms lasting months or years. The full epidemiological and neurological consequences of a pathogen that infected this fraction of the global population simultaneously are still being measured. The one that opened the wound of feudalism. The only one we eliminated from existence. The one that followed every army. The one that kills through dehydration in hours. The one that killed more than 2 world wars. The one that put children in breathing machines. The one that bleeds the vessels from inside. And the one that happened while the camera was on. None of them chose you. They do what they were built to do. Replicate. The problem was never the virus. It was always how long it takes science to have a name for what's killing you. This was Dark Passage.